You know that Keeley Companies is all about fostering the world-class culture through their incredible cultural pillars. Well, it was time to add a seventh cultural pillar, Keeley Green. Guided by the mission to raise the sustainability standards by which they design, build, operate, and live, Keeley Green is dedicated to using a holistic approach to leave a positive impact on our environment, create a future that is sustainable for generations to come. In the words of Rusty Keeley, we are just getting started. You can learn more about that just getting started mentality and all the work they do by visiting my friends at Keeley Companies online at keeleycompanies.com.
Welcome to the Live Inspired podcast with John O'Leary. John is the #1 national best-selling author of the book On Fire. He's a world-class inspirational speaker, and he's the host of the Live Inspired podcast. John interviews extraordinary individuals on their life story so that you can wake up from accidental living and more fully live your life story. Here's your host, John O'Leary.
Hello, my friends, and welcome to the Live Inspired podcast with John O'Leary. Today, we are joined by an individual who just had a film released in theaters across the country. No, not yours truly. Stay tuned on that one. I promise you, we still are working on getting the specific date out to you. But this is actually a gentleman who I've become a friend with, an admirer of, and you're going to love his story. You're going to know why they turned this life story into a film and why maybe you should check it out. It's called The Unbreakable Boy. He also wrote a book by the same name. Today, my buddy, his name is Scott, shares what it's like raising a son with brittle bone disease and autism and a heart defect. He also shares how his own battle with alcoholism nearly tore his family apart and the moments of grace that changed in his life everything. He opens up about growing up with a mother's tough love, the lesson his son, Austin is his name, teaches him and us daily, and the journey from brokenness to faith. It's a funny conversation. It's an honest conversation. It's a deeply reflective conversation. And during this time, Scott reminds us that life's hardships don't define us. Our response to them do. My friends, if you need a reminder that life is the most beautiful gift we receive, sometimes we discover that in its imperfection, then this conversation is for you. You will leave with a renewed sense of hope, a deeper appreciation of the people in your life, even the ones you sometimes wrestle with, and the encouragement to embrace every single day as a gift. So let me loop him in. You're going to love him. Let me get him out of the theater and onto the podcast. My friend, now yours, his name, Scott LeRette. Scott, welcome to Live Inspired with John O'Leary.
My pleasure to be here. I'm thrilled, actually.
Brother, before you were an author and a movie star, you were an ordinary human being like the rest of us. So if you and I happen to bump into each other at some movie theater or some baseball game or somewhere in between, and I said, "Hey, my name's John," and you said, "Scott," and I said, "Scott, what do you do?" How do you answer that question these days?
I'm just a sales guy. I'm a dad. I'm a husband. I'm not a star. I'm not a celebrity at all. I'm just, the way I've referred to it a lot over the last few months is I'm just a guy from a cornfield. I'm from Iowa. And I'm not going to change that. That's still who I am. It's just, I decided to open my book, literally and figuratively, and just share my life because I thought I was crazy. And I don't mean that in the clinical sense. I just thought I got this crazy, wacky, messed up family. And I think that most people could probably relate to some part of it.
Let's talk about that crazy, wacky family, but not the current one you're staring at. I want to go back a little bit to
Sure.
that farm boy from Iowa. I want to begin with the warden. Who is the warden, and what was the warden's impact on your life as a child?
Oh, I lost my mother and father in the same year, about 10 months apart, about 4 years ago. And I don't know. I think a lot of people probably do this, but I'll be driving along and I'll lean over to talk to my dad, or I'll be driving along and I'll pick my phone up to call my mother. That's the kind of relationship. I miss him so much. It hurts. And this is not even 5 years ago. But the warden is my mother. We kid and say that she was 4'12". She's a very small statured woman with an enormous constitution, and she's from Cape Cod, and she still talked like it. And she was tough as nails. I'm very much like my dad, I'm sure. I really firmly believe you're a product of your environment. But my mother was extremely strong in all aspects, and I tend to look at a lot of my decisions and mistakes and things that I've chosen to do over the many years. I think about what my mom would think, especially now that she's gone. I'm trying to instill that in my son Logan because he's got a lot going on in his life, so much. And I'm just, anytime we disagree, I'm like, you know what? Because he was really close to grandma and grandpa, LeRette. I'm just like, he's doing something wrong. I'm like, Logan, you think of what Grandma Masha, think what Marsha would say to you right now. I don't have to say anything else. You just think about that and then you get back to me. How important were they to me? They were everything.
You mentioned you're more like your dad. So, to give us a little bit of insight into who you are, tell us a little bit about your dad.
I'll just describe it in my mother and father. My mother was the one who would use the paddle ball paddle, or she'd turn the rings around on her hands and smack us on the head. Dad wouldn't be the one to paddle because back then I'm 60 now, and when I was a kid, you could spank, and Dad was not that way. And believe it or not, though, we never were that way with the kids either. We couldn't with Austin because we'd break him. And Logan was just such a good child. It was crazy. But I'm not a pacifist, but I think you maybe can make the case I am. I'm a lot more even keeled, and it bugs the heck out of Teresa sometimes because she thinks I'm being lackadaisical or disinterested. But really, I'm not as strong, hot, as
All
tightly as
right.
yeah.
You talked about Teresa, so we'll skip over the Oklahoma Sooners and your service with the United States Navy and just
Okay,
jump right into
that's fine.
a clothing store when you see a girl with bright blue eyes. Talk about what attracted you first to Miss Teresa.
Oh, it was her eyes, and there's some other attributes, but the it was a structure clothing store. Do they even have structure anymore? I don't know. I think it's a Gap brand.
Yeah,
Gap
similar.
owns or limited, I think. But I saw her there. I was with a buddy of mine, and I just saw her, and I mess up all the time with stories, and she's always correcting me. But I don't think I got the date then. I went back, and it was snowing, and the mall was closing. I asked her out, and yeah, I was intrigued by her eyes, and I
Are
was
you
looking
are
at
you
things.
that kind of guy, like bold enough to walk into a clothing store, see a pretty girl, and say, "Hey, we should go out"? Is that just who you are, or was this a one and done type deal?
I think Zach in the film was, people always ask me about the accuracy of the film. He was probably a lot bolder in his role than I was in real life. A little more shy, a little more, gosh, can I do this? Just, yeah. But I don't know, something about her had me go back, and that's that fateful day. It turned into where we are almost 30, we've been married more than 30 years now.
It's an impossible journey. And as folks hear about your courtship and your marriage and some of the blessings and struggles along the way, the fact that you're able to keep counting on your fingers as you look upward is remarkable. So, Teresa, when did she first tell you why her eyes are blue?
First I have to laugh though because you say courtship. Because I met her on a January 19th and we had a baby on November 10th. You can do the math, but I saw her eyes right away, and it was fairly soon where she told me because I was fascinated by her eyes because their sclera, the white part of her eyes, are so thin. You can see the choroid, and the choroid is the underlying blood layer in her eyes. So a lot of people think the blood layer's red, and it
Yeah.
doesn't come off that way. It comes off this blue. So she has a chalky blue sclera. So does Austin
Yeah.
because of her osteogenesis imperfecta, her bone disease. And so yeah, it was fairly relatively soon but in terms of us the courtship though, I have to tell you though, it's I've had some questions from people that are like, hey, you say you're a Christian and you're a man of faith and do this and that, and here this happened, and how dare you? Some people are a little more intense about that. And the film's got a PG rating. How can that be if it's a Christian film? And it's fair for them to say that, but the only way to really respond to that is that because it's a memoir, it's a true story, and this is what happened. This is how it happened. And it started where and when I was at a place where God wasn't present in my life. I
Mm.
just totally drowned him out and replaced him with the wrong things. And so, yeah, you shouldn't skip the movie because there's two swear words in it. And she got pregnant because otherwise you'd have this candy cane saccharine sterile if you didn't have any realness to it. And that wouldn't be my story. Does that make
Yeah,
sense?
well, So I read your book, as you and I talked about before I recorded and watched the film. I was amazed at how similar they were. Most films, they
Yeah,
just almost make it up. But like you have to put seven characters into one, and it just
right.
becomes weak. The film was strong because the book is strong and your life story is strong, although broken in some spots, although imperfect in some spots, although you took some missteps along the way. But man, you had a courtship. You dated this girl. This girl eventually becomes the mother of your two boys. She becomes your wife. You've done life together as husband and wife now for 3 decades. I think that's pretty remarkable.
Yeah.
And what makes it most remarkable is how wild the journey has been. So the courtship was short, no doubt, but the
Well,
journey has been long and wild. So let's talk a little bit about that journey.
yeah, just to put a pin in that courtship thing, though, one of the things that we truly did, and I did, it was mentioned somewhat in the film, but again, to my mom and my dad's credit, I made the conscious decision to stick with it because it was a child. And I remember vividly thinking in the back of my brain, I'm not walking away. I'm not gonna be one of those guys
Right.
that no matter what, I don't even know her, but I'm not walking away from my child, son or daughter or whatever. So that was a conscious decision of mine that I did make. And so we stayed together and we worked together for several years before we really got a chance to work on our relationship.
Mm.
And it's funny because Peter Facinelli, my partner, we have these sayings and things that we share. He shared kismet with me, and I'll share more about that later. But there was this one word that I found. It was a Japanese word called kunsakuroi. And it's the Japanese art of repairing broken pottery.
Yes.
And it is referenced somewhat in the film, but it's a lot of people don't know what it stands for, which is uh, more beautiful for having been broken. And that's why I think that the more broken someone is, the more opportunity they have to become better and thrive and be more beautiful because of all that intense, the bad times.
Yeah. We're not here to spend the entirety talking about what it was like before Austin shows up in your life and life moves forward, but I really connected with you as a man as you're getting ready to tell the warden about what's happened. And then her anger and her breaking that cup and then that cup slowly coming back to life again. How nervous was the younger version of yourself before you told your mom, oh, by the way, mom, that girl you met one time, she's going to be the mom of my baby? What was
It's,
that like?
I remember it and I remember where it was. I remember where the conversation happened. And just as a sidebar, the week or so prior, I told Teresa, this is before she told me, by the way. I told her that she looked great. I asked her, Have you been working out? You lost weight?" And she gained like 10 pounds. But I thought she looked great. And she'll never forget that because she's just thinking, "Oh my gosh, I'm pregnant." And he thinks I'm losing weight and I look great. So, anyway, it was at my dining room table in my parents' house in the kitchen, actually. And he just sat there and with this smirk on his face. And it was immediate shock and you idiot. Just she's a strong Catholic woman and she's up beside my head. She would slap me till the day she died. It wasn't anything malicious, just she would just pop me on the face. She did all our boys. And we called her the warden because she was, again, just this strong force that everybody loved. But with that though, that was her. And then boom, it was on to the next phase.
How do we make this better? How do we redeem this moment? Austin, Richard Austin joins the family. And I think you mentioned several times in the book that he did three things very well as a child: cried,
Yeah,
vomited, slept, in
yeah,
that order.
yeah,
Cried, vomited, slept.
yeah.
As a
Um,
first time parent, you don't recognize that this is unusual. Like most babies aren't this difficult, they're not this colicky.
Yeah, we thought it was all colic, and as it ended up being that he was broken. He came out of the womb broken. And for folks that don't know, osteogenesis imperfecta, a lot of people call it OI for short, there's four different types or levels, and it's confusing how they label the levels. But there's one grade of OI where, there are kids that come out and don't survive,
Right.
all the way to type 1, which is what Austin and Teresa have, and they just break bones really easy. it's he's pretty much broken every type of bone, including his back, his skull, his sternum, his coccyx. Otherwise, you got all the toes, fingers, ribs, tibias, fibulas, femurs, humerus, shattered elbow, and we don't know how many anymore it is. But he was born with two broken ribs, and we never knew it, and we thought it was colic. And it I always tell new parents, I don't know how much I believe this really now. I never believed it then, but you just get in that mode where you're up all night or up half the night and you're just on autopilot. And you just get used to it. And I guess you do, but it's easier said than done. But we were that way though. We just take turns every night. We just take turns because he did not sleep.
When did you begin recognizing that not only did he have OI, but he had other peculiar behaviors that other children may not have modeled?
Yeah, he was in preschool and he would prefer to be with the teachers, older people or younger people. And his peers, it was like he had this not aversion, but he wanted to be with them and he was more quiet. And it wasn't until a few years later where we realized the communication kind of plateaued and didn't progress where he was. And then he also started having seizures and he was at a daycare at one time and he was dropped off a changing table. It was a horrible moment, and I we'll never know how that affected him today, just with all his diagnoses, because he's been labeled everything, the whole alphabet soup. But he had one significant event, and he forgot how to tie his shoes. He forgot how to brush his teeth. We just had to start over on these very rudimentary skills that most kids once they learn it. But he had to go over these things, and it was just fascinating is not the right word, but I do analyzing things and I'm intrigued by things, and it intrigued me because I'm like, what is going on? And that's still the case today, by the way. But so yeah, and autism didn't come until much later, after 10 years old, which that was 25 years ago. So it amazes me because you've got kids now being diagnosed below 2 years old, and I can't quite wrap my brain around that, how they can actually diagnose and see that. But I guess they can.
Into this child who is so fragile and so difficult and so amazing. You add another child.
Right.
Little brother Logan shows up in the world. So now you two are raising two kids. They're close in age. There's real struggles ahead. What was their interaction like as little brothers?
Oh, typical. Very typical. Logan was extremely different. He slept like a baby.
Mm.
He was very confident. He grew up. We always refer to him as the older brother to the older brother, but very mature. He matured very quickly. Book smart, very charismatic. He's more of a private person than any of us. Because if you meet my wife, she's extremely gregarious, and some people would refer to that as loud. She's a Southern girl, though, and she embraces that. She's owned that for years now, and she's okay with that. But Logan is this level force. I don't know if it's a calming force, but he's very level and level-headed. He became a teacher and he changed careers though, and he's now in his second month of he's an Omaha police officer,
Wow.
and he just wanted to make an even more of a difference in a different field, and he's doing that now, but and excelling at it. But they did typical things, and Logan stuck up for Austin, and they fought like typical kids do. But I'm sure that's a special relationship that only Logan can really tell you about.
Give our listeners some insight into how Austin acted as a young person, just because, as we all know, autism is a spectrum.
Yeah,
And there are children who are more like your little guy, and then there are others who might be more reclusive and maybe even nonverbal. So, how
yeah.
does autism show up for your son?
For Austin, it's absolutely a spectrum because I've had so many people look at me and or tell me, he doesn't look autistic, which that in and of itself is, I just get a kick out of that. And even people that I have just recently met, and they're really nice people, but I'm like, come on, are you kidding me? And sometimes if I know them well enough, or what does autism look like? What's it
Right.
supposed to look like? Because years ago, though, people would be like, he acts normal, which that word, but he would just be this outgoing, hilarious, verbal kid that everybody loved. And it wasn't until someone would spend time with him, even relatives. We moved from North Carolina back to Iowa, and there were even my mom to an extent. not as much, but other relatives and who would get to spend time with Austin and only days or weeks later would, even months, would say, "Oh my gosh, we had no idea. No idea." I've got a friend that's got an autistic daughter and three autistic kids actually, and she's not verbal, she's not social, she has a tough time. And I've watched you guys and I've watched your story and things like that. And I think there's some things with Austin that are probably more challenging for you than some of the things we have with our daughter. And it is because Austin, he's so verbal and he's so social. I always say that he's verbal and social to a fault. It's over the top. Like right now, there's a pathology to it that he can't stop talking. And it's not funny. It's not anything but just a challenge. That's putting it mildly. He doesn't know how to control his talking. Every once in a while, occasionally he'll say, "I know, I can't stop talking. I'm overwhelming you guys. Turn and walk away."
Mm,
But in the end, though, I think we're blessed though because we can talk to our child.
amen. There was a moment, though, relatively early in his childhood where he lashed out at his brother. And I believe he was on new medicine. I think you were on the road for work at that time. And it shows that this beautiful, good-natured, happy, charismatic, bubbly child also could do things that could potentially harm or worse people he loved. So
Right.
share, if you will, that story and then what you had to do with your son next.
I think so you read the book and seen the movie, and I think that you can see the difference in those two scenes because I believe in the book I'd shared that it was a PlayStation cord.
You and
Yeah,
I talked before we recorded about reviews and
yeah,
viewers who just see a movie do not understand is we're putting together a life story in 90 minutes.
right.
And
So
so when I
we,
read it in the
yeah,
book, it made very clear why you had to do what you had to do.
yeah, and I was the takeaway from that scene though that is always it's stuck in my brain though is because I, of all things, and I think I've got ADD extremely badly. And I overanalyze everything. I can't get to sleep at night because my brain's always going 1,000 miles an hour. But all I can remember from that scene was I kicked the door in. And in the back of my brain, I'm thinking of Bruce Willis and Die Hard, just doing something crazy like that. And then I kick it in, and he's got a PlayStation cord wrapped around Logan's neck. And that led to where we were, Presbyterian Hospital in Charlotte. And he was in there like 10 days, longer than what was shown in the movie. But it was a medicine. It was a medicine thing. A doctor had changed one medicine radically, and it was one of those situations where you really needed to taper someone or do something, and it wasn't done properly, and it had a profound impact on him. And
So I spent almost 5 months in the hospital when I was a
right.
kid, and my mom has talked repeatedly in the past about the hardest time for her wasn't when amputations, which is agonizing for a mom, painful surgeries for her son, like all these horrible things. It was during this period of time, it was only a day or two where I was beginning to lose my mind. And I
Oh,
was seeing things on the wall and I was just going, I was wild. I was wild. And for her, that was the hardest part of wondering would she ever get her son back? Like the son. He'd be physically different. She was fine with that, but would she get her boy back? You at some point have to take your son to this room, this ward. The door is shut and there's no way to get back in. I think at 4:20 is when visiting hours begin again. And until then, he's not yours. What
right.
was it like as a dad to drop your son off and know like it's completely out of your hands now?
I believe that at that time, all we cared about was we could go see him at 4 o'clock for 20 minutes. And that's everything. It was just everything revolved around that. We get to see him tomorrow for 20 minutes at 4 o'clock. And anyway, and it was the case too. By the time he got to come home, though, he'd befriended everybody on the psych ward. And it's
Okay.
just, but that's just who he is. And it was,
In fact, to do me a favor, tell that story. The very first thing he says to you when he sees you, as the doors open up,
yeah,
mom and dad are coming back in. What does he say?
yeah. And he says, Dad, there's a lot of messed up people in here. You want to go meet them? And so I'm like, dude, you can't say that. And so, yeah, it was real. And there's two sides of a coin, though, because like now he has this aversion to hospitals. And he calls every hospital Presbyterian because that was the hospital
Right.
that he went to in North Carolina. And but yeah, that was tough. Yeah, there are moments in the story that are just difficult to talk about. I'm sure you have those little places that you think about that I've got some that I'm ashamed of, some that are just difficult to go there. I will because I owe it to. people because I opened that door. So
Right.
I guess a part of me feels obliged to answer that question.
Well, life is hard. It's complicated. You're with a woman and now your wife, you're figuring things out. You've got a son with a laundry list of ailments, including a heart condition and everything else we've talked about already. It leads to complexity in every realm of your life, including financially. And maybe the most poignant way of saying what it ultimately led to is when your wife came home and the trash cans were gone.
I think that's a line in the movie that, and I don't know if I think, of course, I'd love bazillion people to see the movie, but I'd recommend people though to see it more than once at least because I'm still picking out things from the movie that I didn't recognize initially. Just little lines, and there's so many funny quotes and profound quotes, I think, because the screenplay, I believe, is awesome, just incredible. But one of those lines was in Zach, what he says in the film is, Teresa, they took our trash bins. I didn't know that was a thing. And when Teresa and I heard that, we both busted out laughing because we thought that's just it's the absurdity. And I think that's part of a word that I don't really use about our story, but I think that there are some scenarios that they're absurd. They're hilarious and but there's pain behind them too. And that was one of them because we lost our house. I'll share with you a story that happened that did not make it ended up on the cutting room floor. I hate it though. But our movie's an hour and 49 minutes long, and you know how that goes. They couldn't make a 3 hour movie, but Kevin Downs is the CEO of a Kingdom Story Company, and he plays into this. But we were going to lose our house, and we had insane bills, and I was drowning myself this way, and Teresa was doing things on her end that she can tell that part of her story. But we got to the point where we sought out and we found this company in Huntersville, North Carolina, that would help us save our house. It only cost us $6,000. And once the check was cashed, phone calls stopped getting returned. We went up there to their office and the doors were locked. But one day we went up there and we could see the little leveler blinds, someone looking out. And I start banging on the door, banging on the door. And then Teresa yelled at me and she said, "Come here." And I got in the car and we peeled around the back of the building. We ended up on I-85 on the interstate chasing this guy in an old town car. It was something like out of a comedy movie or something like that. But we chased him down the interstate. And long story short, a year later, we got all our money back through remediation and some. And he actually ended up in jail. That scene was in the movie. It was hilarious. And Kevin Downs played the guy. And it was priceless. And it didn't make the cut though. But that's how desperate we were. But so we ended up in bankruptcy court, and the judge we had, he ended up in his robes on his what do you call it, in his bench. We made him cry because our story just he was
Yeah.
touched by our story and he wanted to know about it. And there's all these people waiting to get into court and do this and that. And but we I guess we had to go there and do that to get to where we are today. All God's plan.
You mentioned the investment, $6,000. That's real money, in particular when you have no money. In particular, when you have a very sick child and you're wondering how you're going to pay the medical bills and the mortgage and get the trash cans back to medicate yourself against all of this. And you've been doing it for a while, but it's becoming more apparent now. You're drinking.
Yeah.
Sharing stuff like this in an AA circle requires enough audacity, I think. Sharing it with the world in a book or a film, that's bold, man. So, were there aspects of this story, including the drinking, and then a story I'm going to have you share in a moment about you driving these kids home,
Yeah.
that you're like, you know what? This one's for the family, not for the world.
Yeah. The second one's tough, but the first one, it was primarily at home. And in the end, it was just wine. But there was no social etiquette. There was no social aspect of my drinking. It just got to where it was. And I would go out though and do stupid things. And I can't believe Teresa stayed with me. I can't believe she stayed as long. I can't believe she didn't do something sooner. And only would I find out later on that that fateful night that you want me to tell you about here shortly, my brothers were all in town and there was a planned intervention. It never happened because it didn't need to happen. But I think, and I'm pretty sure of this too, but alcohol, I think it kills more people and breaks up more families than any other drug combined. I've heard that anyway. And it's just a devastating drug. And but what makes it even more challenging though is that it's the socially acceptable norm. And drinking. My wife drinks, and she drinks about a glass of wine a week. That's it. She's not a big drinker at all. It doesn't bother me though. I have friends that can't be within 100 yards of a drink, and it doesn't bother me because I think that I have one thing going for me that I've got a good friend that I don't know if they're going to make it back from alcoholism, but I think I have one thing different than he does, and that is I accept it. I understand that I can't because I know if I were to just flip that switch again, it would come back exponentially and I'd be in big trouble
Right.
real fast.
Let's talk about the party. You're in Iowa. You're back home.
Right.
Your home has been taken from you. So now you're seeking refuge closer to your original home in Iowa.
Yep.
Family party, 50th anniversary for an old friend of yours and the families. So you're up
Yeah.
there. T's homesick. So you got the boys up at the party.
Yeah, you did your homework. This is really the one story that pains me to relive, which I do all the time, but it really gets me in the gut because I don't know if I put this in the book, but I remember leaving and Joe's real, by the way. He's still here today and he's evolved over the years. But I remember going out to the car and what happened a little bit different was I fell down and I had rocks, pebbles in my hands and on my knees. I tore up my pants and I was a mess. I was a chocolate mess. And I got in the car and we had a big Jeep and it's about 3 miles home. And I don't recall. I just remember going down the steep driveway to get onto the main highway and then just pushing the gas and I blackout. Don't recall. God was on my shoulder. It had to be. No other way. And so painful, so humiliating, so shamed. So much shame in that event. And it had to be the grace of God. Cliche, but I wasn't done yet, I guess.
You wake up in the morning safely at home. You're wet. You're hungover. You're still drunk. You're wondering how in the world you got home. You're wondering where the boys are.
Yeah.
Just the chaos of life when you're 21 and single, and it's almost like fine at that age.
Mhm.
And you're not 21. You're married. You've got two boys, and you drove them home as a drunk driver, and you don't even know how you got home or where you parked the car. And for Teresa, this is the end of it. It's finally the line that it's just one too far, and that's where it stops.
What happened though is I ended up pretty much quarantined. I was put into a corner of our home and I wasn't locked in a room, but I know Teresa was on the phone and talking to people and doing things all day long. And he's like, don't, just, just don't, yeah, just don't. And I didn't move. And I ended up going to, someone came in and an old friend, and I went to a meeting and I won't say it worked. And I'll never say I'll never drink again. An alcoholic never says I'll never drink again. I know I can't drink again. But the meetings, they're a blessing. And it enabled me to have my faith come back even stronger. And I think that my faith and sobriety I don't know if the word is inextricably. They're tied to one another. My sobriety and my faith.
There's a quote from the book, and I'm going to read it so I get it just right. But you wrote, as I got sober, I experienced a new feeling,
Mhm.
grace. Tell
Yeah,
me what you mean by that line.
I think grace is something you receive without strings, without asking for it, without demanding it. It's God's grace. It's just you just know it's like faith. What is faith? You can't put your finger on it. There's no uh, you can't see it, you can't touch it. But part of that's understanding what happened and what I did and what I had. And grace is just something I felt because right now I can feel this tickle in my chest because I'm like the gratitude and I have for even being here how I am right now. I'm not any better or worse than anybody. I'm just an average person, but I have a colorful story, and I think grace enables you though to touch your hope. Hope is just another big word. And tell you what though, there's three things that I think are key to my story that are absolute. One is faith, one is love, and the other one, it's not grace, although grace should be in that top three, but I think you can put that underneath the faith category. But the third one, though, is I think gets short shrift, and I think that it should probably get a lot more play than it does, and that was humor. Faith, love, and humor, because boy, Teresa and I just, if we wouldn't have and couldn't have learned how to laugh at ourselves, at each other, yeah, I don't think we would have been enabled to really learn how to love each other first, because we weren't in love for I don't know how long. I don't know when we fell in love, because we weren't when we had a baby. We weren't. Didn't know each other. How could we be in love, let alone like each other?
Mm. You find that love. It's certainly deepened over the years. The sobriety has allowed it to expand profoundly. How did sobriety change the way, not just sobriety, how did embracing grace change the way you could love your wife?
I think we realized that there's some things I'm never going to change about my wife, and vice versa. And grace is a funny thing, but I think realizing what you have and what's important. As I said, grace is something that you don't earn. I don't think you can't reach for it and ask for it. I don't know if I'm making any sense with that or not, but it's just
Yeah.
God's grace is something like faith that you just can't touch, and you know it, and you have it. And I think that's really probably what happened to our relationship over the years, is that God became much more of a focus in our relationship, even if it's by exposure, putting ourselves into that church setting and surrounding ourselves with people of faith. And we moved on from several relationships, and we made a conscious decision to rid ourselves of toxic people. And no, and it's not a bad, that's a good thing. There's nothing toxicity can do to you that's good.
Mm.
And it made a profound impact on us as a family and us as a relationship, because all those toxic relationships, all they do is they want to bring you to their level. And it's once we did that, it increased our everything in our life, in our marriage, in our relationship. And so grace is an amazing thing. I think I could talk to you for a long time about grace and still not understand it, because it's such a,
That's awesome.
grace is awesome. Yeah.
I'm going to run you through a couple quotes and then we'll begin moving toward the finish line of this episode, but the starting line of life.
Sure.
This first quote is about your baby Austin, your
Mhm.
oldest son. And you write that Austin owns and celebrates each and every moment. And then you said each experience, every single one of them to Austin is a gift.
Mhm.
That's true for Austin, but you write that because you want it to be true for the rest of us. So help us understand, how do we see life like Austin does, as if
Well,
each and every moment is indeed a gift?
I think that the one quote though too that I think is it ties in with this, and it's one of the best lines in the film, which is, "I wish I could love everything or anything as much as Austin loves
It's a great
everything."
line.
And it's like that. He just like the hat. People want to know about the hat. Is the hat a prop? Does he wear the hat? Come on, really? And yeah. He Situate Harbor in south of Boston. His cousin, my cousin Wendy, got him that hat, and he wears it today because he doesn't care what people think about it. He,
And that the hat that Scott is referencing is this goofy jester hat. It's 2.5 feet in every direction with bright colors and balls at the end of it. And now he's holding it up on the camera for those who are watching this episode. It's madness and with great pride.
yeah, absolutely.
This kid
So,
wears it, man. It's awesome.
and I wrote a chapter in the book called Strawberry Shakes and Sunny Sneezes. It's my favorite chapter because it's a favorite moment. It's a favorite moment for me in the book, because it was just a feeling. It wasn't because of something that happened, but it was a feeling that I gained by in that experience of that day that we went to Burger Star, which was this chain. It's no longer here, which stinks, but we loved that place. And it was fun writing that too, because one thing, I don't know how you felt with writing, but you get your order and you put it on this little zip thing, and you throw it back on the line that's above you, and it goes to the chef and they cook it, and all these different Austin just loved those sounds and the mechanisms and the machinations of how this place worked. And that can be good or bad for an autistic person, but he loved it. And but yeah, the sentiment though of the strawberry shake means everything. It He finds that though in so many things. It's just it can make you could take the most mundane thing and he turns it into the most beautiful thing that is in his life at the moment. It can be something really simple too.
It sounds so simple. Living it is so hard, which brings us to a quote now from Austin. And he's saying it to you, but I think you're saying it to us. Dad, you're already half dead,
Yeah,
so live.
yeah, yeah.
Tell us what that quote means.
It's funny because he'll even today he'll say, because I turned 60 last year, and he'll premise something by something he wants to do in the future. And he's like, Dad, don't take this the wrong way, but you probably won't be alive when I do this, and you'll probably be dead. But I don't mean that offensively. And he wants to qualify everything, and I don't know. It's a great quote. I don't know what to say about that. It's just it. I said something I think recently where it was someone asked me that on the red carpet 2 nights ago, and they said, "What would?" Or maybe it was rapid fire with Zach Levi. I said, It's not a dress rehearsal. You only get one shot, so don't blow it and get to work." Just and I know I some of the stuff is so cliche and stuff like that, but I don't mind cliches because they're cliche for a reason.
Right.
They're impactful, they're meaningful, and someone said it before because it totally made sense. And that's what Austin is. He's never been in a dress rehearsal. He lives in the moment every single moment. But
There's several heroes we don't have time to unpack. I think Joe is a
yeah,
hero, and I'm not even going to bring him up because to bring him up, we will run out of runway. But Joe
right.
is definitely a hero in the book, in your life, and absolutely in the movie. I'm glad I read in another article they thought about cutting Joe. I'm
It's my
glad
favorite
Joe made
character.
it, man. So
Yeah,
Joe's awesome. Teresa is
right.
awesome. But there's another awesome individual who, if you're not careful, you might miss, and that's your boy Logan.
Yeah,
Million stories to share on Logan, but do me a favor, share the story of, and this will be one of my final questions. Share the story of the bully and how
yeah,
Logan handled it.
yeah. And just what's really beautiful though is that Tyler, and he's called Tyler in the film, but Tyler was at the red carpet in Manhattan the other night. It was really neat because Tyler and Logan and Austin, all three actors were beside him. We've got this great picture of all six of them, which is just beautiful. But that's where, in terms of creative license for the film, that scene happened. But in real life, it was an Easter basket, and we changed it to a skateboard. But that scene though could be more than Tyler because there were two or three or four these bullies that had happened over the years, and there's a couple of bullies that have just turned their lives around, and they've reached back out to Austin years later. There's one I'm thinking of in particular, but Tyler, he's absolutely the forefront. He's the face of that bully persona, and he's one of Austin and Logan's best friends to this day. He showed up in Manhattan, and we invited him, and he's a great friend. I love Tyler to death, and
And just to put context on it, all my friends, this is a typical high school bully who is verbally abusive and condescending and just rough with these boys.
mhm.
They're the kind of kids, this bully, who we hate in real time and we resent for the rest of our lives. It's just true. And yet your boys, man, spin him after fighting with him and help redeem him. It's a beautiful story.
Yeah, and Logan really just he saw something that Austin taught him, and he decided to do this. And we all it just caught us by surprise, and it happened in the principal's office. He had a big, huge bag of candy and basket, and it happened, and it was beautiful. But the current life with Austin, it's more challenging today than it's ever been.
But
More difficult. People look at it and see this sunshine and rainbows that I wrote a book and I made a movie and everything's fixed. I've got all the answers, and it my gosh, that's one thing when people ask me and talk to me, I'm like, you couldn't be any further from the truth.
right.
Today, it's 10 times more challenging than it was yesterday or 15 years ago, without a doubt. I Austin in New York, it was wonderful. It was amazing. The whole experience, this whole experience, because we were part of everything. And but the last day and a half, 2 days was just a nightmare
Yeah.
because he can't understand. He doesn't want to stop, and it just affects everything and everybody around him. But I think that was the only other thing I wanted to add. But and he still has his tics, and people ask about that. But when he was younger, he used to tap the sides of his legs, and he'd rub, and his lips would be bleeding, his eyelids would be bleeding because he rubbed it so much. Today, it's more like he does these when he's really or chug a chew. He's 30 years old and he does this, but he does that a lot, and you'll see it when he does it because I saw him do it several times this week, and it's a coping mechanism, one of his ticks or stems or
Mhm.
whatever you want to call it. But
When folks walk out of the theater and they throw the popcorn jar away and the empty soda can goes in the garage, in the trash can, and they head back into their cars. How do you hope their life is somehow slightly different because they saw the film than it was before they saw it?
You answered the question really because what's the goal? First off, I started writing for selfish purposes. It was just for myself. It turned into this thing that I didn't know was going to happen. I didn't know or want to write a book. I wanted a TV show because I thought that would be the perfect platform. And here we are today. And all I would say is that, and I never understood Peter telling me that our story could change the world and change people's lives. And I'm only now starting to understand what that means. But it's that someone walks away from the film or the book, and our story enables them to find one part of their own life that resonates with them in the story that they're able to just step back and say, wow, like in Oklahoma City at a screening a couple weeks ago, there were three gentlemen that came down and were emotional, very emotional. And they said, that was me. Just that was me. And it may have been about one part of the story.
Yeah.
And that's what it's all about. It's simple. I think our story is for everybody else. Um, Therapy for me, and you can make with it what you want, but I hope you take away, and that's probably HarperCollins and Lionsgate and Kingdom. Probably they saw the cross marketability and the ability for so many demographics to embrace something.
Right.
I know that's part of it, why they ticked all the boxes.
Well, Scott, we have 7 questions that we guide all of our movie stars and authors and dads and friends through. They're called the Live Inspired Seven. So get your shoes on, get your
Okay.
jester hat on. Let's rock and roll, baby. So,
Okay.
question number one for my friend is, what's been the most impactful book you've ever read?
Fiction or nonfiction?
Yes, either one.
Okay. Fiction would be The Alienist by Caleb Carr, and nonfiction would be there's a Bible study book that I have by my bed. I think it's called is it no, it's the Bible, the Message. It's a daily verse.
Okay.
It's huge. It's the number one. You've seen it before. It's a burnt orange color.
The Message, yes.
Yeah, yeah.
What's one positive characteristic or one trait you possessed as a kid growing up on that farm in Iowa that you wish you exhibited as brilliantly today?
I was a city kid in a farm town, so I wasn't really a farm kid, but I think my ignorance, think sometimes not knowing everything is probably a blessing. And it did probably help me a lot, but thinking that you can conquer the world and beat the world and you're bigger than the world and you're stronger and this and that. And I used to be that way, you
So
know.
there, I feel like you still are that way. But
Yeah.
if your home caught fire, this is question number three. And all living things, that's your baby, your bride, your animals, are out safely. You have an opportunity of running in and grabbing one item, one physical thing. What would you grab?
That's not fair. Okay, I've got my Cavaliers out. I got my family out. Dogs and everybody's out.
Yep.
It would be it would be the King James version of the Bible that I've had for 40 years.
Wow. If you could sit on a bench on a gorgeous day and have a long conversation with anyone living or deceased, who would you like next to you?
Okay, I don't think JC is that's not fair because I think everybody's going to say Jesus Christ, right? I don't know if I'd choose. I'd love that. That'd be amazing. But I Johnny Cash.
JC, man, we're consistent. We have to go by the same initials. So I appreciate you go from Jesus Christ to Johnny Cash.
Oh, there we go. Yeah.
What's the best advice that Johnny Cash, Jesus Christ, or anybody else ever gave you?
It would be any of the things that my mother would tell me. Just stop it and just go be. And it wasn't so much of what she'd said. It would be how she said it and how she looked at me, and I would know what she meant. That was most impactful on me my whole life, the way she would talk with me. I miss it so much. It hurts.
I have a meeting right after this podcast, and I'm telling you, right after that, I'm going to go out to my mom and dad's house and say hi. They're both still here,
Ah,
and I take that for granted too often. That's one of my takeaways from this is not to take for granted those who we love most.
do it, man. I say that to so many people I know or that I meet or even friends. I'm like, man, just go spend more time with your mom.
Right,
Go spend more time with your dad because once they're gone,
right.
you do. My brothers, we all say the same thing about reaching for that phone or leaning over. Ah, it happens all the time.
What would you tell your 20-year-old self? So we're at question number 6 with one to go. So what advice would you give yourself at age 20?
Oh, I walked away from God, so it would have to be something in that regard. Hey, you can party and have fun, do this or that, but you better be in church on Sunday morning or Wednesday or whenever. Go find a church.
Scott LeRette, it has been said that all great people can have their lives summed up in one sentence. How would you like yours to read?
It just always love. Just I don't know. It'd just be a word, really. Just love. Zach asked me that. Just one same question, really, or basic same question, and it would just be because my wife always likes to quote Corinthians. I think it's 13:13. Of all of these three, love is the most. So
Yes.
yeah, it'd be love.
From one unbreakable boy to another, I appreciate you writing the book, putting your heart out there, putting your struggles out there, and putting the reason for joy in your life out there. You model, exude love, and we appreciate you sharing part of that story with us.
It's been so much fun. I could, like you said, I could talk to you another hour easy, but my pleasure, and I'm humbled and thankful and grateful that you had me on.
My friends, that is the voice and part of the story of my friend Scott LeRette. His film is in theaters right now around the United States and beyond. Check it out, The Unbreakable Boy. It's awesome. My name is John O'Leary. Today is your day. Live inspired. Well, my friends, I told you on the front side that his life story would be one worthy of learning from, and not just his life story, his children's life stories, his bride's life story. And it's a reminder that all of our life stories have value. There was a quote shared about halfway through from his son. Hopefully you caught it. Hopefully you wrote it down. If not, his son reminds him, Dad, you're already half dead. So start living. It's a cute expression for a child to share with their aging, in finger quotes, dad. But it's a critically important one that you and I embrace today in our lives. What are we waiting for? Why are we stuck living in the monotony and the misery of the headlines and the struggles of social media and comparing ourselves to everybody and everything else rather than recognizing our life is a gift? Start living. Start living. When I think of individuals who've dealt with some hardship and are living in spite of it, one guy who comes to mind, we've had him on the podcast. He's teenage singing sensation, Sparsh Shaw. We had him a couple years ago, but Sparsh during the episode refused to let his disability define him. Born with brittle bone disease, he's better known by his rapper name. That's probably where you know him, Mom. Pure Rhythm. That's right. Pure Rhythm's going to join us. He's first captured the world's attention with his viral rendition of Eminem's Not Afraid, and later had the honor of singing the national anthem at Madison Square Garden. So he's a big deal, but he took time away from that kind of work to remind us of our work. Sparsh radiates positivity, embracing his journey with awe-inspiring grace, and our conversation was filled with contagious optimism, with resilience, and will remind you that in spite of the hardships, the best is yet to come. If you want to check out a little bit more on my buddy Sparsh Shaw, check it out at episode 138, episode 138, or you can go online with me right now. That's where I hang out. I'm at the website, johnolearyinspires.com/podcast, and we'll have a link in today's show notes. My friends, how do you change the world? I'm asking for a friend. How do you change the world? The best way I know how is one life at a time. So when you get values from these episodes, when you get impact and inspiration from these episodes, do me a favor and just tell one person that you listen to the Live Inspired podcast with John O'Leary, and so should they. Together, you and I can make a mighty difference in our community and beyond. So family, thanks for tuning in this time. And until next time, my name is John O'Leary, and today is your day. What a gift. Live inspired. Keeley Companies was started almost 50 years ago by the one and only Larry Keeley. What started as a small family-owned paving company in St. Louis has grown to a nationally known full-service construction, development, and restoration partner. Larry the Legend, as he is affectionately known, has been a part of this growth every step of the way and continues to provide guidance as his son, Rusty, my buddy, drives their vision and achieves results on purpose. His unwavering foundation of a family culture with a focus on people has gotten Keeley Companies to where they are today, and their journey is truly just beginning. To learn more about Larry the Legend and Keeley Companies, check them out at KeeleyCompanies.com.